Yo, what's good with y'all? It's your boy Nick, and today we're reacting to what's next for the Golden State Warriors. Let's get right into it.
One of the weirdest teams in the entire NBA to try and figure out what's happening with their offseason, with their future, is the Golden State Warriors. We've got sound
Sure.
bites of Steve Kerr telling Draymond and Steph, I don't know what's next. He doesn't know if he's going to be the head coach moving forward. They don't know what the roster is going to look like. And they have a lot of decisions to make, decisions that could impact not just Steve Kerr, not just Draymond Green, but Jimmy Butler, Steph Curry. I don't think it's crazy to think that any combination of those guys.
Listen, this is one of my favorite teams in the league. I got the Hawks, I got Minnesota, and then I got Golden State. I am a big Steph Curry fan. He's one of, if not my favorite player of all time. I feel like it's going to be a crazy offseason for Golden State and Steph Curry. I feel like this year that just happened, they got eliminated in the play-in, and think this is like the second year in a row or the first time they haven't made the playoffs. And then Steve Kerr is on the last year of his contract, so it's going to be a lot of things changing in Golden State. Curry may go, Draymond may go, or it may be Steve Kerr.
Guys might not be employed by the Golden State Warriors next season. So let's look into what their offseason looks like and what could actually happen next year in Golden State. Now, in terms of an offseason overview, right now they have the 11th pick in the draft. The lottery isn't for another 2.5 weeks or so. They have a less than 10% chance of a top 4 pick. Now, obviously, if they're able to get a top 4 pick, that opens up all kinds of possibilities, which we'll talk about later. But that's not the worst spot to be in. It's a pretty talented draft. 11th could yield a pretty good player. And if the lottery odds are on their side, maybe they'll end up with a top 4 pick. It is worth noting that a decent amount of college guys in this like 11 to 17 range, guys that aren't guaranteed lottery picks, are going back to school because they'll actually make more in college than they would in year one as a fringe lottery pick in terms of their NBA salary. So that is a negative for teams like the Warriors that certainly need an influx of talent in the draft. In terms of future picks, they owe one future pick to, I think, Dallas in 2030. It's like top 20 protected. But in terms of trying to make a big trade with another team, they have the 11th pick, maybe more after the lottery, and then access to pretty much all of their future first round picks. Now, when you look at where this Warriors roster is right now, it's really difficult to see a path for them to be like a top 6 team in the Western Conference next year with the roster that they have. And I think that informs a lot of their decision making. If we assume for a moment that Steve Kerr is going to be back and they're going to try and compete next year, this roster is just not going to be good enough. The teams that are the top 6 in the West this year, because again, you'd really like to avoid a play-in game if you're the Warriors because the roster is so old and you want to avoid extra playoff games. The top 6 in the West this year, which is Denver, Minnesota, Houston, OKC, San Antonio, and the Lakers. I think that's 6 teams. That's going to be really, really difficult to kind of break into if you're Golden State without significant changes to the roster. I also think that it's interesting when you look at their payroll sheet, the way they've had things set up basically since they acquired Jimmy Butler. They trade for Jimmy Butler, they give him an extension, and this coming
Jimmy getting hurt for sure hurt them a lot. But as we see right here, they picked up Kristaps. That frees up $30 million if they don't re-sign him. Then you got Steph's contract. He making $60 million for next year. Then you got Draymond. Then you got Jimmy. So it's a whole bunch of big contracts that they got from older players. And that's a problem. They may have to try to find a way to send out Jimmy if they want to keep Draymond and Steph.
Season, the 26-27 season, kind of looks like a last dance kind of deal. It looks like maybe we'll bring back Steve Kerr for another year. We've got Draymond, Steph, and Jimmy all under contract for another season. And then they're going to go into 2027 free agency. At least that's the way that it looks right now on their payroll sheet. That's been kind of their motto for the last year and a half or so, again, since they acquired Jimmy Butler. But some things have happened that maybe could pivot them away from that direction. Obviously, Jimmy getting hurt in the first place and being a little bit of a question mark to begin next season. Moses Moody also suffered a really tough injury as well, and they just weren't as good this year.
Boy, that Moses Moody injury looked crazy,
as I'm sure they thought that they would be. So that's kind of the overview for all the decisions that Golden State needs to make this offseason. Now, the first thing that people are going to think about when they look at this Warriors roster and they think about the lack of competitiveness, frankly, that this roster is going to be able to put together in the Western Conference next season, you're thinking, okay, well, let's make a big move then. We know that they were exploring Giannis trades at the deadline. Over the last handful of years, they've been involved with guys like Paul George and Lauri Markkanen. Of course, they ultimately do land someone like Jimmy Butler. So if we're going to do a last dance kind of deal, well, let's add another guy to this group and maybe they can compete in the top 6 of the Western Conference. There's two problems with that. One, financially, it's basically impossible without trading either Jimmy Butler or Draymond Green.
Yeah.
They just don't have the money to make it work. Steph makes a ton of money. Jimmy makes a ton of money. Draymond makes almost 30. The rest of the roster, they only really have a few guys under contract for next season outside of those 3 guys. And they're still, $15 million, $20 million over the salary cap. So they have all of these assets that are just taking up all of their cap sheet. And they also would have a hard time finding value for each of them individually, which means if you want to make that kind of a deal, if you want to go try to get a Giannis or whoever, Draymond Green or Jimmy Butler has to be in the trade. It's just a non-negotiable. There's no way to put a trade together where you can add a 4th guy to Jimmy, Draymond, and Steph. And we know that at the deadline, they at least kind of considered maybe putting Draymond in a Giannis trade. They really decided not to trade away Jimmy, which would have been kind of the easiest way to do it, is Jimmy and some stuff, because he's got that giant salary.
So what I would say, though, this offseason, the Warriors could sign Kristaps back on a sign-in trade and try to move him and Paz for like some type of package. Maybe get Giannis, maybe get someone like Paul George, or just get a player that fits into their rotation for real.
Matches a lot of these other star players, and they're not in any danger with like the second apron stuff right now, at least. So they'd have the flexibility to do pretty much whatever they want to do financially as long as they're matching the salaries. But it's just difficult logistically without including either Draymond or Jimmy. So if you're thinking, oh, well, they add a 4th guy to that core 3 and suddenly they can compete at the top of the conference, they'd have to upgrade either the Jimmy or the Draymond spot in order to actually make some kind of move like this happen, which to me makes that possibility less and less likely, because if they were going to do that, why didn't they just do it at the deadline? Why were they relatively adamant about not trading away Jimmy Butler? Because if it's not going to be Jimmy, then it's going to have to be Draymond and some other stuff, which it would be anyway if you're going to be trading for someone like Giannis. But just from a salary perspective, it's going to be difficult to get to that point, even just trading away Draymond. Now, the other part of this that's a little bit interesting in terms of the way the contracts line up is, let's say they want to run it back, where they make whatever roster moves and they want to try and compete for a playoff spot. What do you do with the contracts of these guys? Do you just go into the year thinking, well, we're just going to let Jimmy Butler walk in 2027. We're going to let Draymond walk in 2027. We're going to let Steph walk in 2027. You're just not going to have extensions for any of those guys? I find that hard to believe. So to me, that's going to be pretty telling this offseason is what do they do with those guys contract-wise, especially obviously with Steph. Because if they go into the year, regardless of the roster moves that they make, if they go into the year with all 3 of those guys on expirings, or at least whoever's left on the team on expirings, that tells me it's absolutely a last dance kind of scenario. And if it goes poorly, maybe 1 or 2 or all 3 of those guys are real trade deadline options as well in the middle of next season. Now, that's a long way out.
How giant are Zaxby's giant?
The thought of them all coming back together, it might not happen. Draymond may not be back. Steph may not be back. Steph might request a trade or something. And then most importantly, Steve Kerr. I don't even know if he's going to be back or not, because this is the last year of his contract.
Steph Curry not having an extension, not having a contract with the Warriors from 2027 and beyond, it's definitely kind of a little bit of a red flag there in terms of what their future team building strategy is. Now, in terms of in an immediate sense, we're not really going to know a whole lot with this Warriors team until after the lottery, unless we get some kind of news about Steve Kerr between now and then, which I don't anticipate that we will. I don't think there's going to be a front office shakeup. I think Dunleavy's pretty locked in there. And so it's going to really come down to, okay, where do we land on the lottery? Because obviously the way the lottery works, they're either going to be 11th or later, or they're going to be top 4. They're not like drawing for the 7th pick in the draft. So unless that 10% chance, that 9.4% chance.
If they land a top 4 pick, all I'm going to say is that they are just confirming that the lottery is rigged. Because listen, what the NBA is thinking, if they give Golden State a lottery pick or a top 4 pick, they're thinking, okay, Steph is on his last year of his contract. Draymond on the last year of his contract. And then they bring Steve Kerr back. This is the last dance for this team. So let's make something that will make them more relevant again and boost them to be able to be a contender again. So by doing that, they would give Golden State a top 4 pick, and they may end up with a guy that can help their team a lot. I'm talking about a guy like Caleb Wilson. I'm talking about a guy like Cameron Boozer, um, Darren Peterson, AJ DeBonsa. Those guys can help Golden State a lot. And that changes them from just being a regular playing team to possibly top 6 if they get that top 4 pick.
To go up into the top 4 comes true for them, they're going to be at the 11th pick or later, and then you can kind of start to make some decisions after that. If by some miracle they're able to get a top 4 pick, things get really interesting really quickly, because this is a franchise that has a history of trying to do like a quote unquote 2 timelines kind of thing with James Wiseman and Kuminga, and obviously that didn't work. And given kind of the scars of that situation, if they get like the 4th pick in the draft, I don't think it's crazy to think they would really, really aggressively explore, like, here's Draymond in the 4th pick, or here's Jimmy Butler in the 4th pick, and we're going to go out and get Giannis, this, that, and the other guy, rather than trying to develop, a Darren Peterson or a Cameron Boozer, whereas other franchises in their scenario.
And that's another thing that Steve Kerr, I don't know what happened with Jonathan Kuminga. I'm grateful that y'all brought him to my Atlanta Hawks, but that dude is, y'all, Golden State didn't give him the development he needed. Y'all didn't give him the opportunity like y'all are giving Moses Moody. Moses Moody was in the starting lineup sometimes and played more minutes than Jonathan Kuminga. Why are you not playing him while Jimmy Butler is injured? He fills in that role. But you want to trade him for Kristaps, who Kristaps only played about like 5 or 10 games?
Might see this as like a bridge to the next era of Warriors basketball. I'm not sure that the Warriors would be in line with that. Now, it would just be nice to have the option, and we'll see if they do. It's unlikely that they will have the option, but that's definitely one of the main teams I'm keeping an eye on kind of in this 11th pick range, outside of the top 10 kinds of teams that would just completely change everything about their franchise overnight if they are able to jump up into the top 4, and that would create a very interesting and exciting scenario in Golden State. And so ultimately, after the lottery, after we know where the Warriors kind of stand with their draft pick, to me, what's next for them falls into 3 different categories. Option 1 is you go ahead and move on from the entire thing. You find a new coach that isn't Steve Kerr, whether it be because he decides to move on himself or because they fire him or whatever. And at that point, that signals to everyone. It signals to the rest of the organization, to Steph, to the entire league, hey, we're moving on from this thing. I can't imagine there's going to be a scenario where they're going to get rid of Steve Kerr as coach and then they're just going to run it back next year and hope for the best. I think they would be looking to explore trading Jimmy, trading Draymond, whatever they can get value-wise. And obviously the last part of that scenario would be trading Steph, which I find really, really difficult to believe. But again, if you're not going to extend the guy, you don't want to lose him for nothing. Some serious questions start to come up if Steve Kerr is no longer the head coach for Golden State. So that's option 1. Option 2, you bring back Steve Kerr, you run it back, you make some moves along the margins, and importantly, you bring back someone like Kristaps Porzingis. I was very skeptical about them trading for Porzingis, trading away Jonathan Kuminga, and he actually got decently healthy and helped them towards the end of the year, and he can be, as we've seen in previous seasons, a real high-impact kind of player. And so if they're able to get him to come back, make some other moves along the margins, maybe there's a dream scenario next year where they are actually competing in the top 6 of the conference if their team stays healthy. It's unlikely that they would stay healthy with a core of Steph, Jimmy, Draymond, and then Chris.
Hey, old heads out there, 30 plus. You don't know if they're gonna stay healthy or not. But I feel like if Steve Kerr's gone, Steph and Draymond will not want to play for another coach, in my opinion. So I would say bring Steve Kerr back and just try one last time to build around them. That's what everybody wants to see for real.
Job opportunities.
Everybody wants to see Steph get in a ring.
But maybe it's possible And this, with the exception of bringing back KP, would be pretty similar to what they did last offseason, where they just kind of made some of these moves along the margins and tried to find guys they thought could maybe help them, because they're just not ready to give up on this era yet. There's a lot of emotions and feelings behind this era of Warriors basketball, and so they don't necessarily want to just move on from that in a negative way. So you run it back and do kind of the one last dance thing. And then again, if that doesn't go well, that opens up some really interesting trade deadline possibilities for Golden State. But I think I think option 2 is probably the most likely of the three. The third option, of course, is the big move. Whether it's Giannis or somebody else that hasn't become available yet that suddenly becomes available, whether it's Donovan Mitchell, I don't know. You make that big move. And ideally, that guy is someone that helps you now and helps you on into the future whenever Steph decides to move on. So like Donovan Mitchell would be a perfect example. Giannis would be a pretty good example, despite some concerns there from some people about how his game might age. And in that scenario, you'd have to trade either Jimmy or Draymond. And then we're talking about like significant draft assets as well, because they don't have a lot of player assets that teams are super excited about. It's like Brandon Pajemski and not a whole lot else. Like Moses Moody is hurt. If you're trading Jimmy in this scenario, you don't know what you're getting from Jimmy if you're one of these teams. And if you're, Milwaukee, you're probably trying to reroute that guy elsewhere anyway. And so ultimately, that is a difficult scenario for me to envision happening unless it's literally Giannis. There's not a lot of guys out there that would justify them trading either Draymond or Jimmy, plus all of these future draft assets that it would take to get that level of player, just to try and get 1 or 2 more years out of Steph's potential championship window. And even if you do that, I'm not positive that like Steph, Giannis, and Kristaps Porzingis is enough to compete at the top of a loaded Western Conference. And so ultimately, like I said, unless it's literally Giannis and the market just works out that way where they don't have to pay as much as you'd think because the Bucks just like screwed that up by not trading him at the deadline, I think that scenario is pretty unlikely. And so ultimately, I think this comes down to 2 things for Golden State. It comes down to the lottery, the long shot possibility, the less than 1 in 10 chance that you end up with a top 4 pick in the draft. And at that point, everything changes. It's kind of like when the Lakers got the 4th pick in the draft and were able to trade that for Anthony Davis. I'm not sure the Anthony Davis trade comes together if they don't jump up into the draft, top 4 of the draft lottery. And that could be what could happen for the Warriors this offseason. That would obviously change everything. And the second thing it comes down to as well is what they do with Steve Kerr. Because if he's not the coach to start next season, again, I just find it hard to believe that that is not going to be viewed as like a message to the league and to the rest of the organization that the guy that we've had for most of this era is now no longer the coach. We're looking to go in a different direction. At that point, maybe there will be some significant changes with those guys. So ultimately, I think the most likely thing to predict is the midline answer, right? They bring back Kerr, they make some moves along the margins, they don't make a massive deal, they hope Jimmy's healthy, and then they roll with those 3 guys plus some random role players they brought in, and everything else feels much more far-fetched. But regardless, it's a very, very interesting team to try and figure out what exactly their offseason looks like, because they do have a lot of decisions to make.
But for sure, yeah.
An influx of
there'll be video by Sporting Logically. I feel like Golden State should build on this season. They get a top 4 pick. I know the NBA going to give them that. Just because to keep the vibes in Golden State good, you know what I mean? They're going to provide them with that top 4 pick. They're going to end up trading Jimmy probably and getting another piece to go with that draft pick. And yeah, just build on that. Do I think they're going to be an in-season team again next year? I don't know. Depending on what player they get in the draft. As far as Steve Kerr, bring back Steve Kerr. If y'all don't, Steph gone, Draymond gone. And y'all just going to have to rebuild the whole thing. And it's going to be a whole thing. And you know what I mean? But let me know what y'all think down in the comments. 100% of y'all don't make it to the end of the video. But if y'all did, make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, make sure you turn on your notifications. Comment down below some more videos that you'll want me to react to, because it is the NBA playoffs. My Hawks tied 2-2 against the Knicks. And yeah, but yeah, I'm out. You dig what I'm saying? Yeah.